5 books and counting. The Tales from the Omni Vault continues to expand as a universe. Go ahead and check the links down in the description to get your copies today. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the Omni Viewer, and Godzilla Minus One did better than any of us expected. And I really do mean that. It is doing way, way better than anyone expected. Most people assumed that because it was a foreign release film in December, not even with an English dub, and released alongside such other major blockbusters, and being a Godzilla film, which is still considered pretty niche, that it was probably just going to do kinda well among Godzilla fans, but probably wouldn't see much traction beyond that. And yet here we are with Godzilla Minus One doing so much better than anyone could have predicted. It moved to the #1 spot of any blockbusters released in America this year. It's one of the most financially successful foreign release films ever in America. It's financially successful, especially if you consider the global box office against its rather small budget. And not to mention, despite that small budget, it's got visuals in it that put the big multi-million-dollar budget movies released in America to shame. Everyone knew that the special effects in superhero movies in particular were starting to look a little cartoony because they kept getting rushed into production, so there wasn't really time to fix them, but who cared as long as they were able to churn them out on time? But then along comes Godzilla Minus One with a much smaller budget, and yet the effects look so much better. In fact, sometimes they look so real that there are people who have been leaving the theater thinking, wow, they really went all out with that suit, thinking it's a practical effect when it's really all digital. That is astounding, people. Seriously, I remember how there was concern that the movie would get overshadowed, particularly in IMAX, because there was going to be some kind of concert film released at the same time. Who was it? Beyonce, Mariah Carey, one of those. I don't listen to pop music. I listen to rock and heavy metal, and classical and movie soundtracks, because I like to be eclectic. But anyway, there was concern that movie was going to get overshadowed because of some concert film, and yet everyone is talking about Godzilla Minus One. Even people who have never devoted any time to Godzilla before, people who aren't even Godzilla fans, are coming out of the theater after seeing this movie thinking it's the best movie they've seen all year, if not the best movie they've seen in many years. It is quite a thing, and it's leading to some people wondering if this movie is actually going to invoke some change in the entertainment industry. You see, Godzilla Minus One is basically the antithesis of nearly everything that Hollywood has been producing as of late, at least in terms of blockbusters. Certainly in terms of blockbusters, but also just in general. I mean, just look at it. Like I said, good special effects as opposed to sloppy ones, a focus on storytelling and character building and meaningful themes, as opposed to shallow character development, nonsensical plots, and pushing the message. Making the most out of being a small-budget, intimate film, as opposed to being a bombastic, large-budget film. Godzilla Minus One really is the antithesis of Hollywood, despite the fact that it's the latest entry in arguably the biggest franchise in all of Japan. Yeah, I know, people say that if you go to Japan, stuff like Neon Genesis Evangelion and Ultraman and whatnot are technically more popular, but come on. The world would, at large, probably would not have even cared about Japanese pop culture had it not been for Godzilla. Now, in a previous video, I'd spoken about how I think Godzilla Minus One is definitely going to change the Godzilla series going forward, at the very least from Toho's side. Godzilla Kong: The New Empire clearly is sticking to the more zany, crazy Hollywood formula, and who knows if that's going to work at this point. We don't know. Nobody has seen the movie yet. But Minus One on Toho's side, I think it's going to take the place of Shin Godzilla. Shin Godzilla had its influence for a few years. That influence really didn't resonate with anyone. So now that -1 is here, I think Toho's going to be trying to replicate that going forward. The question, however, now is whether or not Godzilla -1 will have an effect on entertainment elsewhere, particularly here in America, where, as mentioned, Hollywood movies have just been progressively getting worse and worse. I mean, 2023 in particular has been an abysmal year for the box office. And not because of movie theaters dying like so many people predicted. There have been enough successes to show that people will turn out to the theaters in droves if the movie is good, Godzilla -1 being among them. Before that, you had stuff like Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And I actually think that's it. I mean, those are the ones people talk about anyway. But any other major movie, if people are talking about them, it's not in a positive light. And sure, I know that there are certain blonde-haired individuals out there who are trying to claim that even if Godzilla -1 is technically a success for a small budget film, it's not making as much money as bigger blockbusters, and therefore that technically makes it a flop. But those certain blonde-haired individuals, I think we can all agree, are just plain dead wrong. But that's beside the point. Is this movie actually going to change things in Hollywood? That's the question I want to focus on going forward. Now, plenty of people who have been following general pop culture have predicted that Hollywood is going to change things up at some point. At some point being the key phrase, you know. At some point, they're going to have to stop making movies that are so expensive that they can't possibly make back all their money unless literally everyone sees it. At some point, they're going to have to stop focusing on pushing messages that are dividing people and actually focus on telling a story. At some point, they're going to have to shrink things down and do something that's a bit more in touch with the common people. But at some point seems to be frustratingly far off in the distance, because every time somebody has predicted that the change will happen, it doesn't seem to. I distinctly remember the last movie that was supposedly going to be the game changer in Hollywood was Joker, way back in, what was it, 2019? I mean, Joker was certainly a far more controversial film than Godzilla -1. Well, you know, technically Godzilla -1 has its own controversy, but that's more in line with being just another example of Japanese pop culture that's showing up American pop culture. So that's not a controversy unto itself. Joker, however, had a very specific controversy to it, which was that people were afraid, and by people I mean the media, were afraid that it was going to inspire violence among incels. Instead, all it did was inspire people to do dancing poses at the top of urban stairways. But a big deal was made about the fact that it was a much lower budget movie, especially for a comic book film, and that it succeeded without needing to be released in China, despite all of the controversy surrounding it and the fear-mongering that if you go to the theater, you run the risk of getting shot. You know, it did so well in that regard. People were saying that this was the time for Hollywood to sit up and take notice and start changing some things. Of course, then, like I mentioned, that was 2019, if I remember correctly. The next year, real life took a turn that, well, kind of made any change that Joker was going to affect completely immaterial. It made a lot of changes that might have happened immaterial, to be honest. But the fact of the matter is, the predicted change with Joker didn't actually happen. I mean, to be honest, you look back through film history, and you see that the Hollywood system is frustratingly slow to change certain things, especially if something is so deeply ingrained that they don't even see a reason. Here's a little history lesson for you. Prior to 1973, Bruce Lee was relatively popular, but he was trying to make it really big as a Hollywood star. Of course, that was easier said than done for him because he was an Asian man who wanted to be the leading man, but none of the studios in Hollywood thought that was even possible. They thought that there was no way they could release a movie with a little Chinese guy in the leading role and have it be successful in the greater American landscape, because will non-Asian audiences go to see a movie with an Asian lead? Certainly not. Which led to Bruce Lee basically having to take a lot of really bad paying and disrespectful roles in America, and also make a lot of bizarre, low-grade kung fu films back in Asia. But those wound up doing so well that eventually he did get the chance to make his own blockbuster. He finally had the chance to be the leading man in Enter the Dragon. Now, unfortunately, as everyone knows, he died a few months before Enter the Dragon was released. So we'll never know for certain how the movie would have affected his career. In all likelihood, it would have been for the positive. But there was still some trepidation among the studio executives about whether or not the movie would succeed. Because again, they still have that mindset of white audiences or black audiences or any audience that is not Asian will not go to see an Asian-led movie. All the movies they were importing from Asia, like martial arts movies and kaiju movies and whatnot, sure, they had an audience, but it was a niche audience. Could a movie like this have a broader appeal, that it could be a blockbuster? Well, it turns out that it did. In fact, to this day, Enter the Dragon is the most profitable film of all time. How profitable, you may ask? Well, between its initial box office, subsequent anniversary screenings, syndication on TV and streaming, as well as home media releases, by this point, it has made back 400 times its original budget. I will repeat that. Enter the Dragon, cumulatively, has made back 400 times its original budget. Officially, the most profitable film ever. Now, you could argue that it was a low-budget movie, so of course it was going to turn a profit, but no other low-budget movie before or since has made that kind of a profit. You could also say that the movie was propelled forward into this success because of Bruce Lee's death, and people turned out because it was his last film. Well, that's not always how it works. I'm sure plenty of people would say that it was the death of Heath Ledger that propelled The Dark Knight into its billion-dollar box office, because that was his last film, except it wasn't his last film. Ledger's actual last film was Dr. Parnassus. I don't think that's the full title, like The Cabinet of Dr. Parnassus or something. It's a movie that barely anyone has ever heard of. It was released after The Dark Knight. He was filming it when he died. So clearly nobody cared about that, even though technically that was Heath Ledger's last film. So just the death of one of the stars, or the star, still cannot explain on its own how that movie succeeded. Enter the Dragon succeeded because people wanted to see it. Were there possibly some racists out there who didn't like the idea of a Chinese guy in the lead role of an American film? Maybe, but they clearly weren't the majority. Plus, you gotta figure that even if the 400 times number is the cumulative thing from over the years, it still had to make a really large chunk of that in its theatrical run. Like, it wasn't going to make that much just from all the other stuff. A big chunk of that had to come right up front. So clearly, the movie was successful. How did it change the Hollywood system and its treatment of Asians in film? It didn't. It didn't change a thing at all. It's like, as soon as that movie's run was over, everyone in Hollywood got together and collectively decided that the reason this movie succeeded wasn't because it was a good movie and the race of the main character didn't matter, therefore they could open up more opportunities for people of different races to be the leads and not have to worry about it affecting the box office. No. The executives all decided that The reason the movie succeeded was because of Bruce Lee specifically, but he's gone now. No, the only thing left to do was to create the sub-genre of Bruceploitation, where they would take a dead man's name and proceed to wring as much more out of it as they could, but then just go right back to casting white people in yellowface if they wanted to make movies about Asian people, or otherwise cast all of their Asian actors as Japanese soldiers in World War II dramas. In fact, you might be surprised to learn this, but yellowface was still in practice as recently as 2007. The movie is called I Now Pronounce You Chuck and Larry. Supposedly supposed to be a pro-gay film, but not really getting the job done, and also contains a yellowface caricature. I am dead serious. That's how long it remained in practice. It took that long for Hollywood to get past that completely. Not that I think an Asian actor would have played that role anyway, given the kind of role it was, but I mean, come on. Now, I brought those examples up to point out that just because something is really successful, and just because it is called a game changer, that doesn't necessarily mean that change is going to happen anytime soon. Especially not in a system like Hollywood, where once something becomes ingrained, it is ingrained for a while, and it takes a very long time to extract it, if you will. I don't doubt that there are people in Hollywood who are taking notes about how Godzilla -1 is dominating the box office. The question is, are they taking notes on how to imitate it or how to counter its influence? Look guys, movies take a while to produce. So the next couple of years are probably going to continue seeing the releases of movies that are kind of like the movies we saw this year. Ones that just plain don't work and people don't want to see, so they don't. If Godzilla -1 is going to leave a permanent impact on Hollywood, it might still be a while before we actually see it happen. In the meantime, we're gonna be getting more stuff like what we have gotten. But then again, even if there are people in Hollywood who are not happy with Godzilla -1 succeeding, its success still cannot be denied. So hopefully it'll have a positive impact. In the long run though, we're still left with the knowledge that Godzilla -1 did something that not many monster movies have managed to do. And that is to really mean something to people. To not only be successful, but to resonate on a level that most people don't think monster movies can even achieve. So if nothing else, it's got that. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Thank you all for watching. Now be sure to head down to the description to check us out on other platforms, as well as find links to the 5 current books in the Tales from the Omni Vault universe. Again, thank you all, and we'll see you next time.